In medieval Europe, a nightmare wasn't just a dream, it was a visit. People believed the night could carry spirits, curses, and even judgment straight from heaven or the darker side of the unseen world. Picture a dim chamber lit by tallow candles. A bed with rough linen sits beneath a carved wooden frame. The sleeper lies still, breathing shallowly, as if movement might invite whatever has slipped into the room. In that world, fear had rules. Wake too quickly and you might feed the haunting. Fall asleep too unguarded and the dream could repeat, growing teeth. So families used rituals before sleep, not after waking. They tied protective knots, hung small charms near the headboard, and kept blessed objects close, because protection was meant to be worn like armor, not hoped for. When the nightmare finally struck, the remedy was stranger than you'd expect. It wasn't only prayed over. It was handled, quietly, carefully, within a network of old beliefs about the body, the soul, and the forces that hovered between them. What exactly did they do, and why did it work in their worldview? The answer begins with one object placed at the bedside, and one moment when the room goes perfectly still. Why people feared nightmares in the Middle Ages. In medieval Europe, people treated dreams as more than private feelings. Clergy and layfolk alike saw the sleeping mind as a doorway. A nightmare could be read as a warning, a temptation, or even an unwanted message from beyond the self. Night fell under suspicion, not because darkness was frightening by itself, but because it made the boundary between the seen world and the spiritual world feel thin. Church teaching shaped that fear. Many believed Satan and hostile spirits sought chances to unsettle the soul, especially when a person was defenseless and unable to pray or guard their thoughts. Confession was a public tool for cleansing wrongdoing, and nightmares were sometimes folded into that same logic. If a dream felt sinful, shame could follow quickly. People also lived with the idea that God might permit frightening visions for moral instruction, so an alarming dream was not automatically dismissed as just sleep. Daily life intensified the dread. Nights were poorly lit and cold, with cramped rooms and drafts that carried unfamiliar sounds. A sudden creak in the rafters, a coughing child, or an animal nosing outside could become, in the mind, the start of something worse. Travelers on roads with unsafe inns knew how easily exhaustion could blur into waking fear. In such conditions, a vivid nightmare felt like proof that danger had reached into the household itself. Stories traveled alongside sermons. Folks retold moral tales where dream visions steered a person toward repentance or away from temptation. A nightmare that repeated the same image, teeth, drowning, blood, a faceless pursuer, could be interpreted as a pattern of spiritual pressure rather than a random image. When someone woke drenched in sweat or shaking, the reaction mattered as much as the dream, because strong emotion was taken as a sign that something real had pressed upon the soul. People also feared what nightmares could do to reputation. If a neighbor said a family member had visions, gossip might follow, casting suspicion on character or piety. A night terror could be blamed on neglect of prayers or neglect of household duties, as if spiritual disorder had leaked into the bed. That social pressure made sleep feel like a test, not a comfort. Even household saints' days and fasting practices were treated as preparation for a clean conscience, with bedtime seen as the last moment to be properly aligned. Protective sleep rituals grew from these beliefs, and they looked practical even when they were meant spiritually. The bedside often held objects with symbolic weight: a small cross, a charm blessed by a church authority, a strip of cloth from a religious site, or a prayer written and kept close. Some households pinned protective signs near a bed frame or hung small devotional items where they could be touched before sleep. People might speak prayers aloud at the threshold of night, then hold to quiet breathing until the body surrendered, because silence was not always comfort. It was another way to prevent unwanted attention. What made the fear so persistent was the way medieval life allowed no easy separation between body and spirit. Illness, grief, and poverty were constant companions, and each could tighten the mind. If someone woke after a frightening dream, they might feel not only scared but stained, as though the dream itself had moral consequences. In that worldview, nightmares were dangerous precisely because they seemed capable of entering the moral ledger of a person's life, turning the dark hours into a place where the soul could be challenged. The strange remedy used to protect sleep. In medieval Europe, people treated nightmares as more than bad thoughts. Sleep was seen as a fragile state where the mind and body could be visited by spirits, cursed breath, or restless dead. A person might toss, wake sweating, and swear the fear had come from outside the blanket. So protection began before the eyes even closed. Practical remedies grew out of the era's worldview. Invisible forces could be deflected the way smoke is pushed from a fire. One common protection was keeping blessed objects near the bed. A small cloth touched to a holy site, a strip of parchment with prayers, or a devotional image could hang from a nail by the headboard. Candlelight flickered across carved wooden frames, and the room smelled of tallow and damp wool. Even when families had little money, they prized any item believed to carry spiritual weight. Another protective practice focused on warding the room itself. People scattered or placed herbs around the sleeping area, using plants associated with cleanliness and defensive magic. Rue and other strong-smelling leaves were sometimes tucked near thresholds and corners because strong scent was thought to disturb harmful presences. Some households kept a bundle of dried herbs in a drawer or tied to a bedpost with a strip of cloth, not to cure the brain, but to make the air unwelcome to whatever might creep close. Others drew boundaries in salt, simple and visible, because salt was linked to purification and the refusal of corruption. Alongside objects and scents, many relied on a ritual of quiet control over the household's nightly order. A person would cover mirrors and shut shutters, because reflecting surfaces were treated as doors for wandering things. The hearth was tended so it did not die too soon. A living fire felt like a guard at the edge of the dark. Sleep garments were worn a certain way, prayers spoken in a low voice, and the bed maintained like a small fortress. Suspicious dreams were met not with debate, but with immediate protection. Hands returned to the charm, the prayer repeated, and the sleeping space reset. Even the wording mattered in a time when spoken words were believed to act on reality. A short prayer, a charm carved into a wooden token, or a psalm copied carefully onto a strip of cloth could be pressed between fingers before rest. The idea was simple. If fear arrived, a protective word would hold the sleeper's mind in place. A household might keep a small charm in a pillow seam or wrap it in linen and slide it under the mattress. Sometimes the object itself was plain, a bit of fabric, a knot of string, a stitched pouch. Yet it carried meaning because it was tied to holiness, warding, or learned tradition. When nightmare struck, the response stayed protective rather than analytical. A person might wake, touch the nearby warding item, and sit upright long enough to recite the words again. The room could be rearranged so the bed faced away from a shadowy corner, as if angle and position could matter to unseen visitors. Then sleep was attempted once more, not reckless, but guarded, because in that worldview, safety was an action, not a feeling. The strange remedies were strange only on the surface. Beneath them lay a consistent promise. The night could be managed, and the mind could be anchored against what wanted to steal it. Did these nightmare treatments actually work? When night terrors swept through European households, people treated them as more than sleep trouble. They believed nightmares were messages, warnings, curses, or the mouth of something that fed on fear while the body lay helpless. Church teaching and folk practice sat side by side, so treatment often mixed prayer with objects you could hold in your palm. The question, did it actually work, depended on what counted as proof in the first place. Fewer panicked mornings, calmer households, or a belief that the unseen had finally backed away. In many towns, clergy and lay healers used prayers as a kind of spoken guardrail. Priests urged families to read psalms before bed, and some households kept a small devotional text close to the head of the bedroll. At times, a person was made to recite certain verses repeatedly, not because the words were magic by themselves, but because the ritual gave the sufferer a script to follow when the mind threatened to spiral. Relief could feel immediate. Fear loses strength when it is named and answered, especially when a community insists that the words are meant to repel harm. Alongside prayer, medieval and early folk medicine relied on protective charms that acted like visible boundaries. A common practice was tying cords or ribbons around wrists or bedposts, or setting a charm where it could interfere with whatever approached during sleep. Some people carried small bags with herbs or strong-smelling substances, expecting the air to discourage foul presences and soothe the body at the same time. Dream control was treated as a matter of managing what entered the senses, smell, sight, and sound, because nightmares were thought to cling like dust. Even the smallest detail mattered. A bed placed away from drafts, a candle kept ready for sudden waking, a door latched so a night visitor could not slip in. Not all remedies aimed at the supernatural alone. Some practices treated the sleeper as a vulnerable body that could be steadied. Warm baths, gentle rubbing, and the advice to avoid heavy meals before rest were common-sense measures that also supported the medieval view that an unsettled mind could be fed by an unsettled body. Yet the strange part was how often practitioners described cause as moral and spiritual. If fear rose from wrongdoing, the remedy shifted toward confession, fasting, and restitution. That's where working could become complicated. The nightmare might return, but the person could feel less ashamed, more obedient, and therefore less afraid when it did. In that worldview, the night's terror was not only an event, it was a lesson being managed. So did these treatments actually work? In practical terms, some did help people sleep more safely, at least for stretches, because rituals reduced uncertainty. A household that rehearsed prayer, prepared a light source, and placed protective items where everyone could see them created a net of reassurance. When the sleeper woke from a nightmare, the familiar object and familiar words offered a quick exit from panic. Still, chronic night terrors and recurring nightmares weren't erased for everyone. Belief could soothe, but it couldn't always stop whatever the mind produced during vulnerable sleep. Evidence from surviving accounts is mostly indirect, because people recorded outcomes as trust in spiritual protection rather than measurements of symptoms. The fact that rituals persisted suggests they often brought comfort, even when they weren't a guaranteed cure. When treatments failed, families usually adjusted the ritual rather than abandoning it. More prayers, a different charm, stricter nightly habits, or a request for clerical blessing. That pattern itself shows how the remedies worked in daily life. The aim was not only to expel a nightmare, but to restore order to the household's night, turning darkness from an enemy into a guarded space. The night wind dies down, and the room grows still. In the candle's guttering light, the maker ties the last knot around the small pouch, linen stitched tight, with bits of dried herb and a scrap of written charm. Not medicine the way we mean it now. In their world, nightmares were whispers, omens, curses, or restless spirits that found weak places in the mind and in the home. Outside the shutters, the street is dark and damp. Inside, the family leaves the charm where only sleep can reach it, near the bedpost, under the pillow, or hung at the head like a quiet guard. A bowl of water sits ready by the threshold. If fear returns, the ritual says, the water will hold what the sleeper cannot. No one explains it as chemistry. They watch signs. A calm breath, a softer face at dawn, the absence of the pounding dread that can make a person sick. Morning comes without ceremony. Someone touches the child's forehead. The same child who woke screaming now sleeps deep, jaw unclenched. The story spreads the way stories always did, through kitchens, chapels, and bedside talk. People remember what worked, not what sounded clever. Yet the strangest part is what they refuse to blame. They don't say the remedy fixed the mind. They say the night was answered. The charm named a protection. The herbs offered steadiness. The prayers framed the darkness. In medieval Europe, especially in households shaped by Christian faith, sleep was sacred ground. Nightmares weren't only feelings. They were part of the unseen world pressing against the known one. If you want to understand why these rituals felt powerful, keep watching. In the next video, we'll follow the same worldview deeper, into church lore, household objects, and the strange protections people carried when the dark felt too close. Share your thoughts on what you'd trust to face a nightmare in a world that had no modern answers, and come back, because the next remedy has a history that might surprise you.